Hello everyone, this is Thomas, one of the co-creators of the Japan Archives. Just a quick thing before you get into these first few episodes of our podcast. We're a few months into making this show now. I am recording this particular bit in January 2020, many months after our first episode has aired. And Heather and myself just want to say that if you want to see if this podcast is for you, if the editing, storytelling, and sound quality is enough to keep you around, then perhaps skip ahead to our most recent episodes to see where we are at, and then work your way backwards. Of course, if you don't wish to do that, that's all good. Just be gentle with our episodes until our most recent ones in January 2020. We've come a long way and have made many improvements, so if you listen to these first few and think it might not be good enough for your ears, go on. Perhaps skip ahead to our most recent. Anyway, guys, that's enough from me. On with the show. Welcome to the Japan Archives. We're a podcast taking bite-sized pieces of Japanese history to bring to you every 2 weeks. We're going to try to keep this a very casual podcast as we go through these varying topics. And Heather, who is with me on the line as she is setting out learning Japanese history, has complete freedom to stop me at any point should she have any questions about the topic we are covering each episode. I'm your host, Thomas.
And I'm Heather. I'll be reading the poem at the end of the podcast. Please be patient as I continue to learn Japanese pronunciation. We'll also be translating the poem into English, and I'll endeavor to share background of the poet too.
That sounds good to me. But before we get started, Heather, are you ready with a cup of tea? You are. Okay.
I don't have a cup of tea today. I actually have a bottle of my favorite Oi-Ocha matcha tea. It's cold because it's really hot here in Western Japan.
Okay, that's fair enough. But you got the AC on, right, to cool you down while we do this?
A little bit, yeah. Oh, how about your tea? What you drinking?
Oh, today I've got the Yorkshire tea from England that my mum sent me, so I'm very happy right now. It's like a taste of home, so.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah. But today, Heather, I want to tell you a little bit about one of the goddesses in the Shinto religion. So I'm just wondering before we start what you actually know of Shinto.
I know it's one of the major religions of Japan, that there are shrines and that there are many gods. And that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Okay, so we don't have much to go on, but I think we can work with that for now.
All right.
So this is a continuation in some way from episode 1, which I'm hoping we can record at some point together. So in episode 1, we had the two, they weren't the first gods, they came a few generations later, of the woman who was called Izanami and her husband, who was also her brother, called Izanagi. Now, if you translated their names into English, you would get something similar to he and she who beckons. Anyway, so they descend to Japan. Well, they descend to Earth after forming the first island called Onogoroshima, and together they slowly create the islands of Japan. But that is a topic we've slightly covered, and a topic we'll go back to another day. I want to tell you about the final moment of Izanami's life.
Okay.
So Izanami, by this point, is pregnant yet again. She's given birth to the islands of Japan and several other gods, but another baby is ready to be born. So she's there, as you do, in labor, but there's something wrong with this one. There's something different about this child. As she's giving birth to the child, it's burning her on its way out. It's physically causing her harm. But finally, she gives birth to the child which they then call together Kagusuchi, which is the equivalent of the god of fire. And you could translate his name into English to something similar of Flame Elder. I think that would be a good translation.
Yeah, I see the notes you sent me. Yeah, the first kanji is ka, which is fire. So I can read
Yes.
that kanji. I can't read the rest.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the other kanji,
Maybe the
but
last one is soil or dirt, but yeah.
I think the last one, because of the extension on the first line, is maybe the one used for samurai instead of earth. But I think that is something
Ah.
that might be worth looking into at some
Hmm.
point. So she's given birth to the god of fire, and as he is the god of fire, he has literally burnt his mother from the inside on the way out.
Oh.
So understandably, his mother is in a lot of pain. She's crying out to everyone who will listen at the time. But sadly, even though she is a goddess, the damage had already been done. And she is dying now. Like, there is no way to stop her from passing into the afterlife. But in her death throes, she gives birth to 6 more gods.
Oh, God.
Now I'm going to try and pronounce these gods, so please bear with me.
Okay.
You have the brother and sister called Kanayama Biko and Kanayama Hime. When it comes to these gods' names, the Biko denotes a male and the Hime denotes the female.
Princess, right? Hime.
Something, yeah. Princess would be Hime, so I assume Biko would be the equivalent of prince.
Mm-hmm.
Then she gives birth to the next 2, which was Maku Musubi and Miza Hanome. And finally, she gives birth to another brother and sister pair called Hani Yasuhime and Hani Yamabiko. So all of these gods were created from, let's say, various ejections that came out of her body as she was dying. I'll leave that to your own imagination of what they were. So she's given birth to the god of fire and these final 6 children, and finally she gives her final breath, and her spirit passes on to the land of Yomi. Now, Yomi is the Shinto equivalent of the Japanese underworld. So she's moved on to there, and she is the first goddess to have died. So she's the first one to have actually passed on to the afterlife. So after that, time passes, and her husband Izanagi is understandably in mourning, and he takes up her body and takes her to a place called Hibayama, which you could translate to Mountain Spirit Court if you wanted, and it's there that he lays her body to rest. During her funeral, he sheds tears for his wife, and his tears that fall to the ground become another god, another spirit called Naki Sawame, which is something reminiscent of Much Wailing Woman. So in a way, she could be the goddess of tears or the goddess of mourning.
So basically, Izanagi and Izanami, basically everything they do kind of creates life. So crying, dying, various ejections.
Yes, you see that a lot in the original myth. Like, someone cries, a god will be born from it. If someone's blood is spilled, a god will form from the blood. So I think it's almost too easy to create a god, in my opinion.
You have to be careful during hay fever season, because if you sneeze, there's about 10 more gods you just made.
There is actually one god that was created by sneezing, if I'm honest. In one version of these myths, the god Susanoo, which later becomes the god of the underworld after he's exiled there, actually in one version of the myths, he is born from Izanagi, who blows his nose. So yeah, they pretty much covered all their bases when it came to creating the gods.
Yeah.
So he's buried his wife, he's cried, another spirit has been born, and he returns to his son, the god of fire, and he's understandably angry. He was the cause of his wife's death. So he takes up his sword. It's a massive sword. It's described as 10 spans long in length, and he uses this. He beheads his child there and then. There is no remorse, no apologies. He takes up his sword and beheads his own child. Now, going back to what we just said about blood becoming gods, because he's beheaded his child, the blood transforms into 8 new gods. It depends on where the blood is at that point. So the blood which is upon the blade of the sword becomes its own spirits. The blood that's on the handle of the sword becomes its own, and similarly, the blood which falls to the ground also becomes different spirits. So the god of fire is now dead, and Izanami decides that he wishes to see his wife one last time. So he crosses the rivers, he crosses the mountains, until he reaches a place called the Ifuya Pass. And according to legend, that is the place where you can cross over into the realm of Yomi, into the underworld. So he enters into Yomi at the pass, hoping that he will see his wife one more time. Now, it takes him a while to find his wife, but he does eventually find her. She's there, she's safe, and as soon as he sees her, he begs her to basically return to him, to come back to the land of the living. His wife is very touched and moved by his words, and she decides that she will talk to the spirits of the underworld to see if there is a way that she can return to the world above. But that is one version of the stories. In others, there are similar things to the old Greek stories in that he asks her to come back with him, but she's already eaten at the hearth of the underworld, so cannot leave, which I think is kind of reminiscent to Hades and I forget what's his wife called. What's her name?
Persephone?
Persephone, yeah, and eating the pomegranate so she can't leave the underworld. It's very similar in that regard. But either way, she says she can't return. But also at this point, when she is going to ask for permission to leave, she asks her husband not to look at him. She doesn't want to be seen in the realm of the dead. But he grows impatient and decides he will look at her regardless. But by doing so, he offends her because she's in the land of the underworld, so understandably she has begun to rot. Her body is bloated, it's covered in flies, it's infested with maggots, and she becomes angered with him, and he becomes disgusted in his wife, who he wanted to save and bring back to the land of the living. So he decides to run away. He's come all this way and he decides to just flee before her. Now, Izanami, understandably livid with her husband for doing all of this, sends what is described in the book as foul feathered hags to pursue him through the land of the underworld. So he's running, he's trying to flee these people to return to the world above. He does everything he can to try and scare them away. He throws the vines down, which are intertwined into his hair, which turn into... what do they turn into? They turn and grow into grapevines, which the hags quickly devour, but then they continue their pursuit of him. Next, he then takes the comb which is in his hair and throws it down, the prongs of the comb turning into bamboo shoots. Again, the hags quickly devour them and continue their pursuit of him. Now, because the hags have yet to stop him in their pursuit, his wife also decides to send an army of 1,500 warriors to chase after him, as well as the 8 spirits of thunder, which in some versions of the story actually dwell upon her body. So each spirit sits on a different part of her, like one on the head, one on the hand, one on her back, one on her leg. And each one is associated with a different thunder, like the darkening thunder, the ground thunder, things like that. Now, he has this entire army pursuing him, and he finally reaches the door back to the land of the living. At the door, he finds a very large peach tree. So he plucks 3 of the peaches, and he strikes a threatening pose with them, which scares everyone away. Now, what's your opinion on that?
He finds 3 large peaches and then strikes a threatening pose with the peaches.
That is literally all he does, and everyone that has been pursuing him runs away in fear.
The only thing I can think of is they saw the price of the peaches, because fruit here is very expensive, and they were so horrified by how much 3 large peaches cost. And went, nope, I can't afford it, I have to leave. And that I
So you're saying the denizens of the underworld have their own currency? Is that what we're going with here?
To be honest, everything else has happened. I could see that happening within the realm of possibility. I'm going to go with that, because otherwise I really can't figure out why peaches. 3 large peaches. I mean...
I have to stress, they were large pizzas. Pizzas? Not pizzas. Peaches, okay? They weren't just any size, they were large peaches.
Are these Momotaro peaches? Are there 3 young children coming out because Izanagi is god and his emissions, I guess emissions is okay to say, causes new gods to be created, so maybe Momotaro is coming out of these peaches.
Sadly, Momotaro is not born from these peaches.
Yeah.
So we'll have to save his story for another day.
Yeah.
So everyone has run away now, but he doesn't want to chance it.
he doesn't want to risk them pursuing him again at a later date. So he finds a large boulder nearby, which he rolls across the entrance of the underworld, basically barring anyone from returning from death. Now, his wife finally appears at the boulder, and finding her way blocked, they then decide to divorce with the boulder set between them. So they say the sacred words of divorce, but in their anger, his wife declares that every day from this day forward, she will kill 1,000 people every single day. To which Izanagi replies that he will ensure that 1,500 people are born every day. Now, as a side note, there doesn't seem to be a god of life in the myths of these old gods. So for me personally, I assume that Izanagi is like a god of life because he is the one giving birth to humans every day, whereas his wife becomes his opposite. She, in a way, becomes the goddess of death. At least that's my interpretation.
Yeah, it could be because like they were doing so much creation, like both together. But then when she went to the underworld, it would make sense that she would kind of become more death affiliated.
Yes, exactly. So they've divorced now, and she remains in Yomi forevermore. And so she is renamed, and her new name is Yomotsu Okami, which would translate to something akin to the Great Spirit of the Underworld. And that is actually the end of her story. She is never really seen again in these old myths. She is mentioned from time to time, which we will no doubt cover in later episodes. But as far as Izanami is concerned, that is the ending of her story in the original myths of Japan.
Oh, I really hope she went on to have a happier time as the great spirit of the underworld.
I doubt there's much to do in the underworld. I mean, she'll keep herself busy. She has 1,000 people every day to kill, so she has that going for her at least.
All I can think of is it Thanos who takes people out with a snap? Does she snap her fingers, or does
Every
she
day
just...
she just clicks and 1,000 people perish.
maybe today I'll just go and see. Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Huh. Oh dear, it's very violent.
It is very violent. I mean, up until that point in the stories, there hadn't really been any violence whatsoever. Like, the death of Izanami and the fire god is probably the first instance of violence in these old myths. So, the books I used, if you're interested for today, there were two books I referenced called the Kojiki and the Nihongi, and they are the two oldest, or two of the oldest sources for these mythological episodes of Japanese history. Of the two, I personally prefer the Kojiki. It's a more cohesive narrative, as in it is written as one story. Whereas the Nihongi, which was written afterwards, it has the same story, but it also within its pages has, however, there are other stories which suggest this, or other people have said this. So there are like 10 different versions of certain parts of these myths. So it can get very confusing at times, where one god is like born from the blood of a sword, whereas in another version he's just born, in a more natural way. So yeah, I prefer the Kojiki. So if you were ever going to read one of these, that would be my recommendation.
Are these in English, or are you reading them in Japanese?
I have them both in English. The Nihongi, it's quite an old translation, but it comes in two books. It's quite big because it also covers the first several emperors of Japan. But the Kojiki one I am reading is a more recent translation.
Oh, well, excellent. I don't know too much about the creation myth of Japan, so this is really fascinating, and I really had no idea that so many things could cause so many other things to be created, like sneezing and coughing and crying and chopping off heads.
Well, I'm sure we'll get into that in future episodes, so you have all that to look forward to, I'm sure.
I am looking forward to it.
Good.
And giant peaches.
So, I'm wondering if you have a poem for me this week.
I do indeed.
So who is it by?
I will pull up my notes.
Okay.
This week's poem comes from the book Ogura Hyakunin Ishu, or 100 Poets, One Poem Each. And this poet is Fujiwara no Yoshitaka. There's not a lot of information about him, but he was a Japanese poet. He's a waka poet, actually. He lived during the Heian period. He was a captain of the Right Bodyguard, and he unfortunately died at age 20 of smallpox. And his twin brother died the same day.
Oh, that kind of sucks.
Yeah, so it's a very, very sad story.
You said he was a waka poet. I'm just wondering what exactly that means. Like, what is the meter of a waka poem as opposed to like other poems?
You ask a fantastic question.
Why, thank you.
And to incite interest, we'll talk about that next time. We'll talk about the differences of the different kinds of poetry in Japan.
Oh, you're gonna make me wait till the next episode to tell me. Oh,
yes.
Okay. Well, at the very least, was there any other anthologies that his poems were recorded in, or does he just have the one poem in this Hyakunin issue that you mentioned?
Yes, he is in another anthology. It's actually a private collection of poems, and it's entitled Yoshitaka Shu.
Okay, so the Yoshitaka was his own name because it was a private collection, right? So he named it after himself. Okay, I understand. Okay, cool.
Considering he's at the age of 20 that he died, it's probably not surprising he would not have a plethora of poems.
That makes sense. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, so on to the reading.
君がため、お力ざりし、命さえ、長く無がなと、思いけるかな。
And what does that translate into, Thomas?
The translation I have here, which I don't have here because I'm looking at the wrong poem. Oh, we're doing so well. Okay.
I know!
So the translation I have got for you for this poem, so the one I've got goes as follows. I always thought I would give my life to meet you only once. But now, having spent a night with you, I wish that I may go on living forever. Which I think is kind of a sweet poem.
Very beautiful. Very, he's quite beautiful, but also he seems kind of like not a pickup line, but I could see something like that on Tinder.
Trying to think what the modern equivalent would be if you stuck that on your Tinder profile.
I don't know. Apparently, should give some people some ideas and type that up and say, here you go. Use this line this time.
Yeah. Well, if anyone listening has any ideas of what that would be on someone's Tinder profile, please let us know.
I want to see some interesting creative responses. Please send those.
I hope we get some interesting responses. We'll just have to be patient and see.
Something about giant peaches will be involved, I think.
What is it? You're obsessed with the peaches today. You're never going to let them go.
I'm still in a threatening peach pose. It's like a finishing blow. Peach pose.
Peach pose. Finish him.
Oh, well, thank you, Thomas. I have learned so much today.
And thank you for the poem. It was a very, very nice poem.
Thank you.
Anyway, I think that you keep interrupting. I'm trying to do the last bit.
I know. It's like we didn't come up with a sign off.
Okay, so I think that's going to about do it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the story I had for you, Heather. I know I certainly enjoyed the poem, so thank you for that. Do you have anything to say?
Yes, Thomas, I thought I would give up my life to hold you in my arms. But after one night, I find myself wishing I could live forever.
Oh, it means a lot to me, Heather. You have no idea.
You're so welcome. Just don't say anything to my husband.
It's our little secret, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
But anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We're trying something new. We hope we'll get better with this over time, so please bear with us. But until our next episode, be sure to check out my website, which is a database I'm pulling together for all these episodes, as well as Japanese history in general. You can find that over at the historyofjapan.co.uk. And yeah, if you have any feedback or you wish to review our episode, you can find us over on iTunes. That would be the best place to place your ratings and reviewings for us, and it would definitely help more people find our podcast. Well, that's it for me. I don't know if Heather has anything to say, but thank you very much for listening, and we hope you tune in next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Was that it? Bye.
I was like, I don't know.
Ah.
See you next time. Mata ne.